Hi, thanks so much for joining us. It is 10 in the morning in Napa, 6 in the evening in the UK. So thank you so much to Adele for joining us from there. We are so happy to have Adele here to talk about her really fascinating book, The Tree Forager, 40 Extraordinary Trees and What to Do with Them. Adele Nozedar is an author, a food writer, and a passionate forager. Her books include Foraging with Kids, The Hedgerow Handbook, and The Garden Forager. A keen forager, Adele has led walks in most parts of the UK, as well as in Spain, Italy, Greece, and India. She is the founder of Brecon Beacon's Foraging, which offers regular foraging courses designed to scintillate the senses and help us find the edible plants that are around us. Thanks so much for joining us all the way from the UK, Adele. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you take it over.
Hi, thanks so much for having me along. This is really exciting. I've never done a book talk in the USA before, so I'm hoping to do, maybe even get some of you guys out foraging at some point. So thanks for joining me on a Saturday morning. If it was me, quite frankly, I'd probably still be in my pajamas. Of course, it's 6 p.m. in the UK here, and it's a beautiful day. If I can tell you a little bit about where I live. It's a country called Wales, which is part of the United Kingdom, but very much a separate country all on its own. It has a population of about 4 million people, so it's quite small. Lots of mountains, lots of trees, lots of rivers, lots of nature. It's really easy to walk out of the door anywhere in this tiny country and get right out into nature, which I think is so important right now, more than ever. And I'm not going to go on very much about the C word, but I did notice that last year during the first lockdown, indeed in the UK, that people didn't really have an awful lot to do or anywhere to go. And as a forager, I've been busier than ever, because I think that people have looked around to see where they are. And I think we've been able to express ourselves in nature much more clearly, I think, than ever before, certainly any other generation since the wars, really. That's my take on things anyway. So my book, the book that I'm talking about today, The Tree Forager, it was an idea that I'd had probably about 4 or 5 years ago to write a foraging book that was based on trees. And I wasn't able to find a publisher. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just carry on writing it. Somebody somewhere will want it at some point. I kind of knew that because trees are really important, aren't they? I'm sure you all agree. And so last year I contacted publisher that I'd worked with on Foraging with Kids, this book, and said, would you be interested in a tree title? And they said, absolutely, yes, they would. And this is great for me because I'd already written half the book. So if you ever want to write a book, start now is what I'd say. Think about the publishers later. So it was all going really, really smoothly. And then I suddenly realized that there was something really major missing from the book. I couldn't work out what it was. And then I suddenly realized that there is a huge connection between trees and music. So just think about that for a moment. It might sound fairly abstract, but abstract is okay. There is a connection between trees and music, and I couldn't work out what that was or how it worked. So in my very clumsy way, I decided that what I would do was I would try and put some music into the book somehow or other, and then wait for the answer as to why trees and music go together. So the first thing I did was I got a friend of mine called Hauschka, who is a musician and who lives on the edge of a forest in Germany. And he writes music about trees. He's getting to be quite well known. He's worked in America a lot. He's won a couple of Grammys. He's been on lots of stages. He's done lots of soundtrack work that you'd know if you heard it. And he also works with lots of other musicians around the world. So he wrote the introduction, which was absolutely perfect, and he couldn't have done a better job. So that was that part of the story starting to unfold as I was writing the book. I hope all this makes sense. And then I realized that the book had to be about people as well as trees, because I'm a person. I tend to see trees as individual people as well. And I kind of wanted to get that idea over that we can look at trees and think of them not just as large lumps of vegetable matter, but as people, if that doesn't sound too crazy, or creatures with a soul, and certainly creatures that are absolutely fundamental to life on this planet. Without trees, we're pretty much lost, really. All these things I'm telling you are, for some reason, I wouldn't normally talk about this, but there's something about Napa Bookmine bookstore that has kind of opened me up a little bit, I think. I don't know what it is. I'd rather be honest with you and tell you exactly the processes that I went through in writing this book. So I wanted all the people that had been coming to me for the last few years that really, really, really wanted to be able to connect with nature. I wanted them to be able to connect with nature via the medium of trees, because everyone has a tree somewhere within their vicinity. Even if you don't know it, you do, trust me. Everyone has a tree somewhere in the vicinity. So my aim was to get people, all these people that thought they were disconnected from nature, I just wanted them to go to their nearest tree, actually acknowledge it, look at it, watch it throughout the seasons, see the sounds it made, you know, the sounds of the leaves clattering through the branches on an autumn day, or, you know, little blossoms starting to appear. And most of all, I said, don't worry about the name of the tree. It's not that important. What really matters is that you learn to connect with it. And guess what? You can even hug it if you want to, but you don't have to. It's not essential. Because I think we sometimes don't always see things the way they were, the way they actually are, and trees in particular. And then, this is really exciting. A friend called me up and said, I've just been reading this deeply scientific book about trees. And she said, in part of the book, there was a discourse about Pythagoras. And Pythagoras said that a tree is music solidified. So a tree is music solidified. That was great, because all of a sudden I could express the idea that I'd been really clumsily kind of working around in my head. And then another thing happened. I'm a big fan of Henry David Thoreau. I would hope that you've heard of him. If you haven't, then you will be fascinated by this guy. He was American. And Henry David Thoreau said, is on this box. It's probably going to be the wrong way round, isn't it? But the quote on this box is something that Henry Thoreau said, which I cling to. And what he said was, the question is not what you look at, but what you see. So the question is not what you look at, but what you see. And all of a sudden, all these different things started coming together. And although I thought I'd written half the book, I realized that I hadn't at all. And I had to go right back to the beginning and start again because of all the different things that I'd found out. Now, I wanted to connect stories that I was writing about trees with people. And I suddenly realized that I also was a person and also had connections with trees. And one of the things that I remembered really, really clearly growing up, and I'd really like you guys to think of these connections from when you're a child as well, because I think as children, we do that thing of not looking at and seeing very, very easily. So I remembered that across the road where I lived in Yorkshire, there was a row of crabapple trees. And we tend to think of crabapple trees as not being edible at all, but they actually are. Some of them are really nice. And because I was a kid, I would have been about 6 or 7, I used to go over there and gather these crabapple trees, and I would eat them down. And I thought they're absolutely fine. And I just assumed that everybody else ate them until my mum found me one day and said, "You can't eat those. You can't eat them. They're really nasty." And I said, "No, they're really great. Try one. They're fantastic. They taste really lovely." And she tried one and spat it out and said, "No, that is totally disgusting. You're absolutely wrong." And I tried another one. Do you know what? It tasted awful, because my mum had said it tasted awful. So it kind of wrong-footed me ever so slightly. And I remember after that, I decided that if I ever worked with children, I would never tell them that something was awful, because we tend to take on other people's ideas sometimes, don't we? Does that make sense to you? I hope so. So what I discovered about Henry David Thoreau was that he was, you know, we talk about people being unique thinkers or thinking out of the box. He was such a personification of that he kind of goes off the scale of thinking out the box. And I would strongly suggest, I'm sure that the Bookmine would have Walden and Civil Disobedience on the shelves. I hope so. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book. And I'll just tell you a couple of little stories about him. So Henry Walden decided that the way people lived generally was a little bit not as interesting as it should be. People were going to work for 5 days a week, and they had, or maybe even 6 days a week, and they only had one day free, and that day was generally to do with going to church. So he said, and I don't know what his mum would have said about this, you can only imagine it. Henry David Thoreau said, "Okay, what would happen if I do my own thing for 6 days a week and work really hard for one day? Wouldn't that be great? Because wouldn't that mean that being a human being was a much more interesting thing to do?" Yeah, makes sense. So that's what he did. So for 6 days, he wrote, he read books, he tended his vegetable patch, he helped people in his community, all these lovely things he was doing. And on the 7th day, he decided he would work as hard as he possibly could. Now, his father had a failing pencil factory. And this is where we start to come into trees. And this is where we wrap trees around the story. So Henry decided that he would go and help his father with this failing pencil factory. And he looked at pencil technology in Europe and saw that in Europe, people were using something called, I forgot the name of the thing. Anyways, the thing you have in a pencil that makes it special, I'll think of it right at the end. As soon as you've gone, I'll think of the word of it. Anyway, he thought it would be a good idea for his father's company to adopt these practices from Europe that were creating pencils that were much smoother and slicker to be able to write with. And during the short time he was at his father's pencil factory, he turned the whole place around to the point that the Thoreau pencil became the best pencil in America. And of course, this book is meant to be about trees. So what are pencils made from? They're made from cedar wood. So the chapter about cedar wood is all about Henry David Thoreau and his philosophy and how he made the best pencils in the world. I hope this makes sense to you. It's very difficult sometimes doing these talks when you kind of can't see anyone or see reactions, but I hope you'll have some questions at the end anyway, in which case I'll just kind of carry on this theme. So yeah, Henry David Thoreau, very, very interesting guy. He even went to prison because he didn't believe that the taxes he was meant to give the government were being spent very well. They'd been spent on the war, actually. And he said, "I don't want any part of that." So he quite happily went to prison. You've got to wonder about his parents, actually, how annoyed they would have been with him. So that's a little bit about how this book works. As I was walking my dog today, I found something that I thought you might be interested in. Where's it gone? there's a chapter about beech. So this is an absolutely beautiful piece of a beech branch here. And beech trees have a thing called beech mast. Can you see it? They're these kind of little nuts here. Now, in Greek, the word mast means food. So we can take that to understand that the ancient Greeks would have eaten beech mast. I'll try and break a bit off so you can see it. There it is. It's quite tiny. Hope you can see that. Is that visible?
There you go.
Yeah. Brilliant. It's kind of triangular. This one is quite dried out. Although they're quite fresh, they're quite dried out because we've had a very long hot summer here in Wales. But it reminded me of an episode of the Little House of the Little House on the Prairie, which I used to absolutely love. I don't know if you watched it. It's probably before your time. You're probably way too young for Little House on the Prairie. But there's a brilliant chapter in which it's very, very, very snowy, and there's not a whole lot of anything on the ground at all. And the kids are sent off with a cart to go through the snow, shoveling up the beech mast that had fallen in the autumn. And they bring the beech mast back to a kind of processor that they've got in a barn, that the whole community is using the same beech mast processor. And what they're doing is they're getting the very hard skin of this, it's effectively a tiny little nut, and getting it down so that they don't have the hard outer skin, but they have the kind of much more tender, quite tasty inside. This story was from the 1930s, so not that long ago, 1930s up to about 1935, 36. So if any of you out there still have parents or grandparents, there's a distinct possibility that they would remember eating beech mast. And it's something like this for me is a reminder of just how lucky we are that we don't have to eat this stuff anymore. Interesting thing, of course, since foraging got to be really quite trendy and fashionable, well, it certainly is in the UK, and I'm seeing quite a lot of it in the US as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit if you're interested, probably at the end. How fortunate we are to be able to go to superstores and supermarkets and farmers markets and get our food from all these different sources. We don't really know hunger, and I'm not saying that we should, but it's not that long ago that people really did. And that's something that, you know, that story about beech trees and beech mast just reminded me of. Interesting things as well is the ash tree. One of the uses that we have for the ash tree is in getting rid of warts. So you might think that that's just a kind of a superstitious thing. How can ash leaves get rid of warts? But actually, there is a possibility that ash leaves and other leaves as well have a kind of acid in them that if you rub it on a wart often enough, then the wart will actually start to shrivel up and die. So that's a scientific thing. It's not a superstitious thing, but I don't think people change that much. I like to think that I'm not superstitious, but actually I know that I am. And I also know that people still are looking for the same kind of treatments and remedies that we've looked at for thousands of years. How do I make someone fall in love with me? How do I stay healthy? You know, how do I win the race of life? And how do I get rid of my warts? So trees give us all kinds of they make us ask questions, I think. So let me turn to something else that I wanted to tell you about, one of the chapters of the tree. So Christmas trees. Who doesn't like a Christmas tree? So they're largely made from a pine or a spruce or a fir. If you have a pine or a spruce or a fir tree, did you know that the tips of all those trees are actually edible? So yes, you heard it here first. You can eat your Christmas tree if you wish to. But I would suggest not all at once. So the Christmas tree was a tradition that came over from Europe, and was adopted by the settlers, you know, in a new country. I suppose it would have been quite poignant, really, having a Christmas tree in another country that you'd only just come to, but it would have reminded you of home and maybe made you feel a little bit sad. But the Puritans actually tried to ban Christmas trees. Can you imagine? That wasn't going to work for long, was it? But Christmas tree tea, funnily enough, also is full of antioxidants and other nutrients, which means that it's actually good for you. If you want to try something like a Christmas tree tea, or indeed if you want to take pine needles and scatter them over, say, mince pies or something like that, all you need to do to make a tea is literally soak the needles in hot water, strain them, add maybe a bit of lemon or lime, and orange juice actually improves the flavor. If you wanted to have a pine flavored sugar for Christmas, that's also really good fun. So you just get your pine needles and smash them up with pestle and mortar, add them to sugar. And I know we're talking about Christmas right now, but I'll tell you why that is. It's because the book is in alphabetical order. I should have thought about that one, really, but it's not far off. So that's the kind of thing you might want to think about possibly gathering now. One of my favorite ever trees is the elder tree, which I know you have in the States all over the place. If you have worked with elder tree before, you'll know that the berries are where the real magic is. You may have had elderflower cordial, which is delicious, but as I say, it's the berries where the real magic is. I have some here. It's ripe and ready here in the UK. I hope you recognise this tree. I know you have it in your country because I've been speaking to quite a lot of you guys. Well, I don't know if the people that are out there now are on my Instagram feed, but I know from my Instagram feed from my friends in America that you do have elderberries, and a lot of them are out right now. The thing about elderberries is where we have wild plants that have been used for generations, it's reasonable to suppose that those plants work. And we can't, whereas it's quite an expensive process to test plants in laboratory conditions, it's expensive and it's time consuming, it has to be double checked and treble checked, and all that costs quite a lot of money. Elderberry, because it has such a long usage, for example, when I say about long usage, there is a mummified skeleton in the ice that was found in Germany, discovered to have been 6,000 years old, called Lucy, and she actually had elderberries in her stomach when she died, so she would have been eating them. So elderberry has been put through its paces quite rigorously, and these particular little berries here have been found to contain the second highest concentration of antioxidants and anthocyanins of any other plant, apart from some of the berries that grow in Scandinavian countries, which actually have a relatively short season. But elderberries can be picked right now in the UK, so look out for them wherever you are. I have an elderberry remedy recipe, that's hard to say, in the book, which is very, very easy to make, requires as little or as much sugar as you want, but you don't have to use sugar at all. Takes not that long to make and will keep you and your family well right throughout the winter. I've been using this particular plant, elder, for about the last 15 years now, and touch wood, you see, I am superstitious. I haven't had cold or flu, and neither has my family or the friends to whom I've given the recipe. So please do look out for that and make it. I think it's really important that we carry on doing these things because they're part of us being human, is to take care of our own health. I hope you that makes sense. With the elder as well, it's one of the 33 trees that emerged after the last ice age, which were considered to be sacred. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but I suspect that human beings designate something as being sacred because it's useful to us. For instance, if you think of the holy cow in parts of India, the cow is much more useful as a milk producing creature than it would be if we were to slaughter it and have a few meals from it. So I think that's why the cow is sacred in India. So I think part of the sacredness of the elderberry is to do with its goodness, with its actual antiviral goodness for human beings. But also all these trees that we're talking about in the Tree Forager also have their deities associated with them, which again is an idea about how we humans make sense of the world. There may or may not be deities in the elder tree. I don't know, but I know lots of humans for years and years and years have ascribed this particular deity to that particular tree. So the elder tree is ruled over by the elder mother, who I always think of as being kind of a bit like a mother-in-law type. So really nice, really generous, really kind, but you don't want to mess her around. So we know how good the berries are for us, but the leaves, conversely, are slightly toxic. So there's toxin and health in one plant, which is quite interesting, isn't it? So lots of superstitions around this particular flower, or berry rather. So I've called it Elderberry Winter Tonic in the Tree Forager, if you're interested. There's also a sauce to be made from elderberry. I'm looking around to see if I have it here. It's called Pontac, and that is a very it's a very old recipe that I've used in the book. It was pre the age of Henry VIII, so he was the English king that had lots and lots of wives and chopped off the heads of most of them, apart from the last one that outlived him. So he would definitely have had something called Pontac. Then again, the story I've just told would make you probably, put off Pontac, if that's what happens to your wives if you drink the stuff. It's really lovely. It's the kind of thing that it's a quite rich sauce which you can use over venison or gamey meats, just as well as dipping in your fries. Really delicious to dip into fries. So there's a Pontac sauce recipe in there, which I think you probably are unlikely to get anywhere else. We talk about juniper as well. So if you have or would like to drink gin, the only thing that is between vodka and gin is juniper, which is a tiny little pine cone actually from the juniper tree. And that tree is also considered to be sacred, I think largely because of its uses. So it was used as an abortifacient, which doesn't sound too cheery, does it? But that's quite a useful use for it. It was also used as an insecticide. It was also used as something which the smoke would actually clear a room that smelt strange, but it would also help clear your throat. So lots and lots and lots of different uses for juniper that aren't just to do with gin. But what I've included in the book is a recipe for a probiotic made from juniper berries, which becomes fizzy. And I don't know if you're into your probiotics, but at the moment probiotics are very fashionable really for gut bacteria and to promote good bacteria and good health. So if you can make that from juniper, you can buy the berries very, very, very cheaply, or you can actually harvest your own juniper berries if you have them around you, and they exist in most countries in the world, so they should be relatively easy for you to find if you know what you're looking for. So probiotics, a good thing to be looking into. Lilac. I discovered that several of your US presidents are big fans of lilac. Who knew? I was really thrilled to find that out actually, and it did occur to me that it might be a way to decide, wouldn't it be great if we could decide our rulers according to whether they were good at gardening or not? because I think I'd trust someone who's good at gardening. I wouldn't necessarily trust somebody who had no interest in it. Anyway, this is completely by the by. So if you've heard of lilac wine, the recipe for it is in this book. Lilac grows quite prolifically in various parts of the US, or you can make a lilac vinegar, which takes no effort whatsoever. It's simply lilac with water, leave the lid off the top, and let the vinegar fly do its work. And then you'll get the vinegar fly, by the way, is an airborne bacteria and kind of part of the story of how we make sourdough bread. And it works incredibly well with any kind of lilac flowers if you have those. The linden tree is one of my favorites, actually. It's the linden tree or the lime tree. If you see very highly carved, well, if you see really elaborate carvings, those carvings have probably been made from the linden tree, because the bast of the linden tree, the interior part of it, is very, very soft. So you can carve it and make something really beautiful and quite intricate. And as the wood ages, it gets more and more hard. So it's the kind of thing you would see in a church. You know, how on earth did somebody carve that? The answer is that they carved it whilst the actual wood was very, very soft. So when I was a kid, I had one of these. This is a Matroyshka doll. Most Matroyshka dolls, I now know, are actually made from the linden tree. And when I was a little girl, I'll see if I can get the lid off this. I'm sure you've all seen these, aren't they cute? So what I did is I had a really lovely one. I don't know where it came from, but I gave one of these to each of my friends. And I kept this one for myself, not this actual set. And I remember in later years thinking, why on earth did I give away that really beautiful Matroyshka set when I was a kid? I don't know. I still don't know to this day why I did it. And I probably wouldn't do it now because maybe I'm not quite so generous. But it was really brilliant finding out about linden tree and the carvings, because it suddenly helped me put two and two together. And I hadn't remembered about the actual Matroyshka dolls for years and years and years. So you know, writing this book really kind of helped me remember some of my childhood, the things that I used to do as a kid. Magnolia trees are one of my favorites. I don't know if you guys have magnolia trees or aspire to have a magnolia tree. They're quite popular all around the world. And what I found out was that magnolia trees were around at the same time as the dinosaurs. I hadn't realized that. And they are pre-bees and small insects. So if you have a magnolia tree, you want to look at it and kind of squint your eyes a bit and go, can I imagine a T-Rex walking behind you? You know, can I imagine velociraptors in the sky? Because that would have been what was going on when magnolia trees started to develop. And there's a little beetle called the Magnolia tree beetle, which only works with the magnolia tree. And it's adapted so that it can get into the very thick petals and actually pollinate the tree, but it's the only one that can do it. And guess what? This little beetle is it's not as prevalent as it used to be. So if global warming continues happening, then there's a good chance that we won't have any magnolias in time. And this idea of global warming and the danger to trees is something that I don't really want to over exaggerate, but it's there for us to know about. And if we want to get involved and do something, then I would say that wherever we are in the world, there is a tree planting organization or a tree preservation organization of some kind. So if you are moved to do something about the plight of these beautiful trees, then it's going to be quite easy for you to be able to do that. And you know, I keep saying, this is my favorite tree, this is my favorite tree. No, but this is my favorite tree. But now I really do have my favorite tree. It's the maple tree, but most But most of all, it's the sugar maple. I absolutely adore maple syrup. Does anybody not? No. So I found out about how maple trees need to be really cold in order to be able to, you know, give us that sap that is where the sugar, is where the maple syrup comes from. And I'd tried to get sap from maple trees in the UK, and you can do it, but it's nowhere near as good as maple syrup. I thought I'd let you know that. But it's the leaves as well, isn't it? They say so much. So if you can tap your maple trees, that's great. But if you can't, maple leaf smoked vegetables are great. Very, very easy to do. So you get the leaves from your maple tree, any maple tree will do, and put them in a water bath, and then put your vegetables on top, and then cook them in a slow oven. And the flavor is, it's earthy and it's delicate, and it's just absolutely delicious and costs absolutely nothing. I mean, if you're keen gardeners and you have maples around you, it's well worth bundling some little bags up to keep the maple leaves for you to be able to cook in this way. It's seriously well worth doing. And again, it's one of the things that I ended up doing with this book as a way of sort of trying lots of different things out. So how, by the way, I'm not giving you every single chapter from this book because I think we'd run out of time very, very quickly. But monkey puzzle trees, very, very interesting trees. They're one of those trees that when the plant collectors found them, a few people in Britain and indeed in America requested them, and it cost quite a lot of money if you were a plant collector. If you wanted a plant collector to go and get you a specific plant or tree, that was big, big, big money. We're talking about multi-millionaire status to be able to have something like a monkey puzzle tree. And what's happening with monkey puzzle trees now is we're seeing there's an awful lot of illegal logging practices, which means that the monkey puzzles are now endangered in their own country, which is Chile and Argentina. The good news is that monkey puzzle tree preservation societies are cropping up all over the place. There's a big one in Kew Gardens here in the UK. And I've been growing monkey puzzle trees myself for the last 5 years. They're doing quite, I should have brought a picture actually, they're not doing too badly. They're about this height. So that's quite good. And after all, although we talk about plants being native to a certain area, we are all on one planet that we all share. So I think it's incumbent upon us all to kind of protect things that are you know, endangered. I would hope that you'd agree with that. I'm sure you would. The other thing that people don't realize though is that monkey puzzle tree seeds are not only edible but delicious. If you like horse chestnuts, which I do, so we're talking about this, sorry, not horse chestnuts, sweet chestnuts. If you like sweet chestnuts, monkey puzzle seeds taste just like that, except they're a little bit sweeter and a little bit mealier, not quite as big. And if you manage to get yourself some monkey puzzle seeds, you can get them from health food shops very often. And you can also get them online if you don't know anyone with a right monkey puzzle tree. They come in huge great balls like this, and the ball falls to the ground, bursts open, and you have maybe 200 of these seeds. And if you gather the seeds and just slit them and roast them in a slow oven, you won't find anything else that's much more delicious than that. And also it's a good talking point, as well as getting people interested in the idea of, you know, the trees being ever so slightly, largely, you know, getting to be extinct actually is really what's going on. You have, I know you're nowhere near New York, by the way, but mulberry trees grow in central, in what's it called? What's the big, in New York? The
Central
big
Park.
park. That's the one. So a friend of mine who's in the USA, I was talking to her about mulberry trees, and she said, oh, they were the first thing I ever foraged. They're in the park. So you guys are so lucky if you have mulberry trees growing like that in Napa. It'd be interesting for you to find out. I would have thought the climate there would have been really good for them, but only you can really tell me that. So mulberries are a very, very interesting plant. Again, they're quite old. In Britain, we tend to think that they are British, but they're not. They're from the Middle East. And the interesting thing is that about mulberry trees is that if you want to make silk, you have to have the white mulberry tree, because the silkworms, that's the only plant that they will eat. And so we get one of the biggest mistakes in history. So in the early, I'm reading this out for you. So I think this is so funny. So in the early 17th century, King James I of England was so keen to establish a silk industry in Britain that in just 1 year, from 1609 to 1610, he planted 10,000 mulberry trees in what is now the very centre of London. However, he missed one crucial aspect of the operation, that the silkworm only eats white mulberry leaves. Unfortunately, the 10,000 trees were actually black mulberries. I can't help but feel sorry for this long dead king. And if you've ever heard the rhyme, here we go around the Mulberry Bush, that's apparently from a women's prison in Wakefield. But I just thought that was so funny that, you kind of, we knock our politicians now for getting things wrong, but it's harder with kings. A politician is different from royalty in that they don't get away with stuff quite so easily, one would hope. But you only have to wonder what King James would have thought when he went, oh, I just spent all that money, all that time, all that labor planting the wrong thing. And what you'd have thought is that they might have left them all as a park or something, but no, he dug up the whole lot because he was so ashamed of himself. Crazy things, eh? So with mulberry, we made a water kefir. Again, we're looking at gut bacteria here. Very, very easy to make. You need to buy your kefir grains online very, very easily. And you can have milk kefir, or you can have water kefir. They're very, very different. So if you're vegan, I'd go for the water kefir, and if you're not so concerned about drinking milk, then go for the milk kefir. It will take about 3 days to get your mulberry kefir going and fizzing, and there's a whole process. The recipe is actually longer than it probably needs to be, but I didn't want to leave any of the details out because it's one of those things that's easy to get right but also easy to get wrong. So it's there in the book. Oak. Guess what? Oak is also one of my favorite trees. It's getting boring now, isn't it? So with oak, those trees, which is so, it grows all over the world. Everyone knows about it. It grows very, very, it gets to be hugely big. Where I live here in the Brecon Beacons, there is an oak tree in a field about half a mile away, which has been dated at 1,250 years old. And every year it's still pumping out acorns that scatter all around the bottom of it. It's still a host to squirrels, or you might call them chipmunks in the USA. All kinds of birds and insects and animals take shelter in that tree. Now, I'm quite interested in stationery. In fact, I'm a bit of a stationery nut, especially inks and pens. And I discovered that if you gather oak galls, so an oak gall it's a bit like a round wooden marble with a hole in one side. You can make a really brilliant ink from very few ingredients. So you need a handful of oak galls, some rusty iron, and some chip shop vinegar. Chip shop vinegar is just like the cheapest, nastiest vinegar you could get. So what you do is you get your oak galls and you smash them up and you cover them in water. And in the meantime, you put your rusty iron and your chip shop vinegar in a pot. And after a couple of weeks, you put the two things together and you see an immediate reaction between the two different liquids coming together. And then you give that a really good stir and you use the way you would any other ink, apart from fountain pens wouldn't thank you for it. So if you're using things like bamboo pens or paint brushes or those little kind of Japanese pens that you can get that have you, and probably it's only me that has this ridiculous stationery fetish, but you can get these great little Japanese pens that are actually pens for doing Japanese calligraphy that have an ink reserve. Oak gall ink is fine for those. And I found out that not only is ink gall ink brilliant to use, but also for 2,000 years, ever since people started writing quite a bit, which is, you know, sort of post-Christian era, really, it was oak gall ink that was used. So we're talking about in the UK, the Magna Carta, and in America, the American Declaration of Independence was actually written using oak gall ink, which is really something, isn't it? If you think that somebody at some point had the job or was tasked the job with finding the oak tree, finding the galls, smashing them up, adding the vinegar, adding the rusty iron, and then going back and filtering the whole lot, possibly with shaking hands, knowing just how important those ingredients were in such an incredibly important piece of legislature, isn't it? You can also make oak from walnut trees, and that's a much easier process. But the other things I wanted to talk about with oak is we tend to forget about the edibility of acorns. So you guys are very lucky in that you have quite a lot of white oak trees, which we don't have quite so many of in the UK. You also have some of the best foragers, by the way. Ewell Gibbons is one of my favorites. If you're into your foraging, I would definitely advise that you pick some of his books up. And also Steve Brill is great. Ewell Gibbons isn't with us anymore. Steve Brill very much is. So Ewell Gibbons talked about the white oak being sweet, really, really sweet, with not so many of the tannins that we have in what we call the pedunculate, or often misnamed English oak. So if you want to make a flour from oak and you have access to white acorns, go for the white acorns. It's so much nicer. It's a bit of a process, as in many foraging recipes. You have to crack off the shell of the acorn. That actually speeds up the process quite a bit. And then you have to smash up the acorn itself. After putting it in water, you put acorns in water to see if any of them are rotten, and the rotten ones will float up to the top of the water, so get rid of those. And then it's a case of mashing and soaking, and mashing and soaking and drying. And it's one of those things that you might only do one time in your life, but it's kind of worth doing it, because I think the thing about foraging at that level is you are doing something that is what your ancestors did, or what our ancestors did. So while you're standing there gathering whatever it is, you're connecting with people before and the people that are going to come afterwards as well. That's something I really love about foraging. That connection not only with nature, but with about human beings that have gone before as well, because it puts you in a different time and a place, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping that some of you that are listening to me right now are probably or possibly foragers, because it would be a good discussion to have and see if you feel that as well. So there's quite a philosophical side to foraging.
So we are at 10:55 here, so 6:55 in your place. I don't know if you wanted to take a moment, if anyone in the audience has any questions. Nothing's come in through the chat, but if you do have a question, feel free to unmute
Even if you don't
yourself,
have a question, make one up and let's see if we can have a chat.
or just want to have a discussion. And if not, then I think we can just finish up in a few minutes. Nobody's popping on.
They're so shy.
I did look it up. We do have mulberry trees in California, although I don't think they're super common. But it says they're suitable for growing near the coast as long as they're sheltered from winds, but tend to do better in inland valley and desert areas of Southern California. So we're in Northern California here, so we might not have too many here. They need long, hot summers, although we do have those too.
Funnily enough, they don't do so well in the UK either. They need to be really quite sheltered. The other thing I would like to tell everyone about is that going back to the music of the trees, in my really clumsy way of sort of trying to describe this idea without getting into too much trouble from the publishers, who, by the way, have been so supportive, it's been untrue. I put together a Spotify playlist full of tree-related songs, which is getting quite nicely populated. And if you would like to add any tree-related songs to it, please do. It's called the Tree Forager, and it's just on Spotify. And we're getting some really interesting things there, which it thrills me every time somebody's one, I get an alert to say that one's arrived. Also, each one of the chapters in this book has its own song, which is also quite fun. And I've got people, what they're doing is they're listening to the songs at the same time as reading the chapters, which is very, very surprising, actually. So yeah, it would be great if you wanted to add some music. It's a great playlist. You also have sumac. I'm assuming that you've got sumac in your neck of the woods, have you?
I think so.
Okay,
I can Google that.
I'm pretty sure that you do. So sumac is something that is it's a beautiful little plant, and you might know it as you might have heard of poison sumac, which is not the one you want, but there's a sumac called rustifina, and the bobs on the top of the sumac are quite fuzzy, and they are very, very citric, and you can make a lemonade from them. So if you have sumac in your area, it's very, very simple. Again, all you do is you put your sumac in freezing cold water, leave it overnight, and the next day you'll have a drink which tastes fizzy and citric, just like lemonade. And by the way, sumac grows quite prolifically in the UK as well, and it tends to grow on wasteland. Although it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful tree, because it grows all over the place. People don't value it, and I do value the things that there are lots and lots and lots of. The plants that are the most common and the ones that are growing around you are largely the ones that you're going to end up using. So if you want to get into foraging, look for what's around you. Also, I'll tell you what I did mean to do. If you get into trees, then you can't help but get interested in birds too. And I found a really easy way of making a very, very cheap bird feeder. So this is an apple. This is a piece of florist's wire. It's dead cheap. Just push this up through, make a little thing there, and then put a twiddle on the top. That's your bird feeder. And we haven't even started talking about Johnny Appleseed yet, who was another great pioneer specifically for apples. And if you want to read, I'm sure you guys all have had the story of Johnny Appleseed probably drummed into your throats from being children. But we don't have anyone quite like him in the UK, really. And when I started reading about him, it struck me that really what he'd done was he'd started the world's first franchise, because he went around his immediate vicinity and beyond, setting up tree nurseries from the apple pips and the seedlings that he was growing. And he would go back and take a cut from all the people who are planting all these different varieties of apple trees, which is mind-blowing, really, isn't it? That's so clever to be able to do something like that, or even have the idea of it. And I think that people tended to think of him as something as a bit of a simpleton, from what I've read, if that makes sense to you. But he you know, his fame goes before him, doesn't it? I think even he has the road that he lived on is named after him now. So yeah, if you get into trees and if you get into foraging, what happens is then you get into different kinds of foods and what you can do with them, and then you get interested in wildlife and birds and all different kinds of animals, and before you know it, your entire life has been taken over. And what I would say again is the thing that I said right back in the beginning. Don't worry about Latin names for trees or any other plants. Just go out there, look at them, examine them, read about them if you want to, but just learn to love these trees that we share our planet with. Makes sense?
I love that. I think nobody's popped up with any questions, so I think that might be a really sweet note to end on. Unless there's anything else you wanna tell us today, Adele?
I could go on and on and on, but I suspect that people want to get on with their days. I've got a chat thing with a couple of
Oh, that
things.
was me putting in the Spotify
yeah.
playlist.
That's really cool.
Which is very cool. I'm gonna check that out. If you have a chance,
please do.
check it out. It's long. I mean, there's a lot on there. It's like
There's
an
a lot on
entire
there.
day's worth of music,
It
which is
is.
awesome.
You can dip in though, so see what you can get on there, Elena. See if you can get on
I
something
will
new that no
try.
one's
I
thought
will
of.
try. Well, thank you so much, Adele. We
Pleasure.
really appreciate you joining us all the way from the UK this morning. I just learned so much, and I can't wait to get out there and start doing something with trees. How exciting.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me. Lots of love.
Thanks. Everyone have a good
Bye.
morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
Bye.
Bye.